to record last week until the second hour, so I'm not going to forget today. So if we go under modules, and we look at our chapter 15, 16, 17 discussion, that is this week's assignment. So this essay, this is like an essay format discussion post. It's not one in which you will be responding to others. For this post, you write a short essay to answer the following questions. By short essay, I mean it should be around 3 paragraphs and 3 to 5 sentences each paragraph. You don't need to reply to anyone else's unless you want to. This is going to be going through the plagiarism system, so keep that in mind. If you're going to copy something from somewhere, that you cite that, or if you're just using your own words, then you should be good. But your question is discuss the different periods in Greek art, explaining which period, what each period is called. There's 3. The characteristics of each period and examples of art from each period, which that should take up 3 sentences for each one anyways. We will be covering those different periods of Greek art tomorrow, so keep that in mind when we're going over to the lecture. Any questions about your discussion post? No. Which, once again, the answers for that discussion post you will be getting tomorrow in class if you just want to wait till then. Or you can work ahead and look at your book in chapter 16. Now, for your other assignment that is coming up, your big one, your last big assignment for this class is your gallery review. For your gallery review, you guys will be following this document that I'm pulling up. I need to share this document now. Share the whole screen. Okay. Those of you online, you should be seeing a Word doc. So for your gallery report / review, I use the words interchangeably because I grew up learning it as a gallery review. But here in the United States, it's called a report. So it does need to be double spaced. Proofread it very, very carefully. That's where you guys struggled on your last essay, is that a lot of you didn't proofread your work, so there were a lot of minor mistakes that could have been avoided. No larger than 12-point font, although I'd just go with 12-point font to stick with, and at least 400 words, at least, bare minimum. Does that mean you will get an A with the bare minimum? No, that's just bare minimum. There is no max, so you can make it as long as you need to, okay? There are 2 parts to this essay, but beyond those 2 parts, you do need to make sure to have an introduction and a conclusion because it is a paper. So you should have an introduction. Then your introduction should lead into part 1. Part 1 of your paper is when you will identify the exhibition that you went to and include some of the basic information of the overall entire exhibition, meaning everything, the overall feeling. So by overall feeling, I'm thinking themes. Oftentimes exhibitions that you go to will have a theme that it's trying to accomplish or achieve. So did the artworks pull off working with that theme, or were there some that didn't quite fit it? How so? Was it a juried show? Juried shows have prizes, so they'll award first, second, third place, like the show that we just had over at the Allison Fine Arts Building was a juried exhibition, so they awarded prizes. What was the mediums? What were the mediums used? Was it just one medium, multiple mediums? Explain that. Here's some guideline questions that you can use to help you. You do not have to answer all these questions. These are just guidelines. So, for example, who was the artist? If there was a theme that was based around an artist's work, maybe name the artist. If there were multiple artists, you can list some. You don't have to list them all if there's a blue million. For example, last semester someone did this and there were about 20 to 30 artists in the show. That would be stupid to list 20 and 30 different names. It'd also be a very boring paper. So you can just pick a couple and highlight them. How did the exhibition look to you? Like an overall feeling again? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Why? Why not? A lot of this is, of course, opinion-based. So you can use I if you want to, or you can get really crafty and be a very great writer and figure out how not to use I. But I'm not going to count it against you if you do use the word I or refer to yourself. After part 1, you will move into part 2. In part 2, you will select one artwork, keyword one, one, and give a focused discussion about it. So discussing the elements of art, all of the things that we studied towards the beginning, the principles of design, the media process, such as what was the process if it was like a print or a bronze cast. Use your textbook to get through this section from those first few chapters, as well as our medium sections. If you think that it was influenced by art history and you're knowledgeable enough to do that as well. So include a critical evaluation of the work as far as value, expression, and composition. Once again, this is very opinion-based, this section as well. And here's some guiding questions that you can use. You do not have to use those once again. And then, of course, you would end off with your conclusion, wrapping it up. And if you did use any outside sources, cite those. Usually this one, no one really uses outside sources, but occasionally I've had people interview the artists. So you would need to cite that interview. Or if you went to the artist's website and you got information from that, you would have to cite it. Any questions about how to do it? You understand the process. Part 1 is an overall exhibition. Part 2 is a single art piece, because every time I give instructions for this, people email me asking if they can talk about 3 art pieces in part 2. It's one, just because it would get really long and it would be really hard for you to do multiple. Now, the question that you guys should be asking is, do I need to go to a gallery and see this in person, or can I do it online? You forgot that question. So there are 2 options. You can go in person if you want to. Of course, there is a grading rubric there too. Or you can do a virtual. So if you were going to go in person, options locally would be the Southwest Museum of Art. They have several galleries. You would choose one of those gallery exhibitions and write about just that one. I think they have 3 on site right now. Don't choose all 3, just pick one and go with it. They're in different rooms, so you should be able to figure out which one's which. With the Southwest Museum, you do have to pay an entrance fee. I think student IDs might get you a discount though. So make sure to take your student ID if you're going to go there. Other options, the Petroleum Museum has an art exhibition that they put on. So that's an option for you. Once again, you have to pay to go into that one. Unless you got a hookup that'll let you in. I had a student last semester that did. Some free options. UTVB has an art gallery, as well as the Ella Noel Art Museum in Odessa. They also have 3 different exhibitions going on, so you can go to that one and pick the one that you like the most and write about it. It's free. Normally, we would have an exhibition here at the Allison Fine Arts Building, but ours just closed and we're in the process of transitioning to the student show. And I don't know if I'd hold my breath to see if we get that done on time because our gallery person tested positive for COVID. So we're a little behind on setting that up right now. But you can also go to a virtual exhibition. I have listed some links under that module. Once again, it's under the module on Canvas. Most of the links under these links work, but I think there was one that I found that had closed, so it's not up anymore. But the others all work. I just tested them on Friday, so they should be fine. If you find one that is outside of these virtual options, make sure to check with me before you start writing on it, just to make sure it will work for your gallery report. I say that because last semester I had like 5 people that did not check with me, even though I told them probably a dozen times to check with me. And they wrote about museum collections. There's a large difference between a museum collection and an exhibition. An exhibition is very concise. It has maybe 20 or 30 artworks. A museum has thousands of artworks over a large genre of themes and time periods. So make sure that if you're going to choose something outside of these options, that you check with me. Of course, these all have multiple options within the options. This one has 7 different choices. I think this is the only one that didn't work, is that a language for intimacy. There's some Monet, Basquiat, but there's quite a few under that one. Here is another one with 11. All of these work. I remember the links for those all work. And here's another one with another like dozen or so. So you can choose whichever one you find the most interesting and go with virtual, or you can go visit in person. That's up to you. Okay. Now, are there any questions? There's one question that you guys should be asking. The due date. The due date for these, the guys in the classroom, is on the board, but those of you online, it's not. The due date for this gallery review or report is November 30th. So please keep that in mind. Now are the questions. We good? Okay. If you guys do think of a question, email me, text me, either way, I will answer it right away. And it's probably going to be a question that somebody else is going to have later on. So feel free to ask. That way I can address it as quickly as possible, since you don't have too much time to work on this. Normally when I teach this class, they get like 2.5 weeks to write their gallery report. And for some reason, thanks to Thanksgiving, I think it's a little bit shorter than usual. I'm going to check attendance again because I saw a couple of people pop in late. Those of you that came in late, we did discuss how to do your gallery report, which is one of your final large assignments. You're going to have to look under that module. Now, on to today's lesson. We are starting art history today, which is exciting to me. Anyways, I don't know about you guys, but it's exciting for me. We are starting with Paleolithic arts, and by the end of this, we will be into Neolithic. Those of you online should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation right now. Let me know if you can't. Courtney is not here today, so you can't rely on her. She's usually the one that lets me know if something's not working right. So Paleolithic literally translates to old stone. So we are talking about the Stone Age period to start off with. For those of you that are not too familiar with timelines, and because it can get a little confusing, we'll start off defining BCE and CE, and then we'll go over what our timeline is going to look like. Does anyone online know what BCE stands for? Someone online, what does BCE stand for?
The before Christ era.
Close, yeah. That's what it used to be. I don't know if he said that. So it used to stand for before Christ, but back in 2008 or 9-ish area of time, people thought that was offensive. So instead of saying before Christ, now we say before current era, just to be politically correct. And it used to be that the other abbreviation was AD, which stood for after death or after Christ's death. But once again, in order not to offend people, that was changed to CE, and it means current era. So for those of you online that can't see the board and what I'm writing on it, I have written out our new timeline abbreviations and the ones that our book uses and the ones that I will be using from now on. BCE, which stands for before current era, and CE, which stands for current era. So this is the one time that I actually appreciate a numbers line in math, is for the timelines and understanding how BCE and CE works. So here we have year 0, and if we work this way, it goes to like 1800, 1900, 2020. So the numbers go up, correct? They go up in size. However, if we go backwards from year 0, it does the same thing a number line would. And instead of being negative numbers, we start at like 200, 10,000. The numbers will start small and then get bigger going the opposite direction. Just take off the negative sign that you would normally have in math. So we are focusing on the BCE, our number line today, starting with 75,000 BCE and working our way towards 200 BCE is hopefully where we will get by the end of this week. Of course, 75,000 was a really, really long time ago, and we don't have any recorded history from that era. So the only thing that we really have to tell us about those people are artifacts, which is what we will be looking at today, are some of the artifacts that have been found by archaeologists. So we are going to first look at some Paleolithic paintings. Actually, I feel like there's something. Oh, that's what makes sense. Okay, sorry. I'm like, wow. Sorry, guys. Wrong slide. We are going to be looking at Paleolithic paintings as well as objects from that time period. So history in the form of art history is different from regular history. Regular history, you guys are just reading about people that you've never met and you will never meet because they're dead, correct? Art history is different in the fact that we're actually looking at objects that people used or made and studying these people through their objects and learning about them from objects instead of from writing. Since we are going to be looking at objects today, especially with these older people groups, we are going to get a bit better of an understanding of what they thought was important for their societies versus just reading about what other people have found about them. We are going to be able to actually see what they were like. For example, did they rely on stone tools or did they rely on bronze? Did they make pottery? If so, what was the pottery used for? Was it decoration or did it actually have a purpose? And it's in this time period that we really get to blur the term between art and craft as well. Because a lot of the artifacts that end up in museums and art museums about these people are technically things that have a purpose and function. Usually, sometimes they don't. Because they have a purpose or function, they would technically be labeled as craft, but they are labeled as art because it's one of the few examples of art that we do have from these people. So thanks to these guys, we've been better able to put up an argument for why craft can be considered art. So to give you an idea of the large amount of areas that we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be starting off in South Africa with the Blombus Caves, moving our way up to Europe with the Chauvet Caves and Germany with Paleolithic figures. Then we'll take a little side trip to Utah and Australia and make our way back to Egypt and Mesopotamia. So we're going to be going everywhere today on the map of the world. So we are once again focusing on the Paleolithic era or the Old Stone era. So it makes sense that most of the things that we're going to be looking at today were made with stone tools. So any carvings that we're going to see in this section were made using crude stone tools to carve into other stone. And a lot of the artifacts that we do have from the Paleolithic era are stone tools. We'll also see a few examples of cave paintings. Cave paintings would have been made of powdered pigments. And there are also some examples of beadwork. And that idea of conceptual imagination there is what helps set us apart at this time period from other animals that we're able to create and have an imagination to create things like stone tools are what help us really advance from other species of that time. Of course, that's like whole following the idea of evolution and everything. So there is a debate when art began, and that's because of the idea of what is craft and what is art. But it is fairly agreeable that it is roughly at 77,000 years ago. That is because of an engraved ochre piece or a piece of stone that has been engraved with geometric designs that has been found in South Africa that had absolutely no purpose. Because it had no purpose, it was made strictly for aesthetic functions, for aesthetic enjoyment. And like I keep harping, we are in Paleolithic period. And here is that engraved ochre piece. It was found in the Blombos Cave in South Africa. Once again, it had no purpose or function, but it has this geometric design that was carved with another stone tool onto it. Very rough, very basic. Nearby in the same cave, there were some ostrich eggs found. Ostrich eggshells are very large, and they were also carved onto with different patterns like this. And they were also decorated with some pigments. So this is the Stone Age. So a lot of what we have found as far as artifacts are stone, especially stone figures, such as the Whole Fells figure and the Woman of Willendorf that we're about to look at. The Whole Fells figure is the oldest surviving carving of a human figure, and it is a woman. It is suspected that it was probably worn as a necklace because it was small and it does have a round hole in it for a string to go through. The Woman of Willendorf is another female figure. Both the Whole Fells figure and the Woman of Willendorf feature a very exaggerated female form. So there are some ideas as to why these ancient peoples would have exaggerated particularly the woman's body. What purpose did these figures have? Some archaeologists and art historians believe that it might have had some sort of a religious significance. Once again, we're thinking of ancient people groups, so they might have believed in different things than we do today. Here is that Whole Fells figure from 35,000 BCE. It is made of a mammoth tusk. Kind of looks like a turkey, but it's supposed to be a woman. You can see that she has a very exaggerated breast and vagina. So that's one of the reasons why people think that it might have some sort of religious purpose. Any guesses as to what sort of purpose it might have had? What is something that ancient people might be praying for wanting? Fertility, yeah. So that's why people think that she has exaggerated pieces to her, possibly as a form of trying to have some abundance of fertility at this point in time. Of course, it's from 35,000 BCE, so there's no real for sure answer as to what the purpose is. But nearby, later on, the woman of Willendorf was found. It is from 25,000 to 20,000 BCE. That little C dot there means around. So around 25,000 to 20,000 BCE. This one is made of limestone, and once again, she has a very exaggerated form from a much later date, but similar construction. So was there linked purpose? Possibly. Yeah, you don't have to ask, Tracy, you can just go. Welcome to college. So most of the time in Paleolithic paintings, we're moving on from statues to paintings now. They would not show human figures, especially in European cave paintings. In fact, there's only one example in European cave paintings of a human figure, and it's a stick figure with a bird head. So I don't know how human you would consider it since it doesn't even have a human head. So most of the time they will show animals instead. Why show animals? We're not really sure. Some people think that it might have to do with hunting rituals or have to do with the spirits of the animals in relation to people, or it could just be illustrations of the animals that they saw and they wanted to capture those moments. No one's really for certain why they painted animals all the time. But when they did paint animals, they were very, very realistic. So quite different from these things that we've been looking at. Instead of these abstract forms, they showed animals very, very realistic. And the oldest known set of cave paintings, and the one we're going to be looking at today, is the Chauvet Cave Complex. And then we will look at Utah art. Utah is obviously North America, and so not Europe. In Utah, rather than in Europe, they did show human figures, but they showed them in a very geometric and abstract form. So we're going to look at those after Chauvet Cave. Here's one excerpt from Chauvet Cave, which was found in France. And you can see horses, you can tell they're horses, bulls, you can tell they're bulls. Down here, we have rhinoceros. Once again, this is France. So that tells us at some point, approximately 28,000 BCE, there were rhinoceros in France. There's also some lions in these cave paintings. So that kind of supports also that idea of Pangea, that one time everything was connected, possibly. We are going to take a bit of a closer look at these by watching a short video, just because they are interesting. There's a whole movie about the Chauvet Caves. We aren't going to watch the movie because I have to buy it, and I don't want to buy a movie. Sorry, guys.
On a journey to one of the most important prehistoric sites ever discovered. It's hidden deep within these limestone cliffs. Until recently, the last people to set foot in this place were our Paleolithic ancestors, before a rockfall cut it off from the outside world.
Sealed shut for tens of thousands of years, this place was discovered by cavers in 1994 and then closed off to the public immediately. Very few people have ever been allowed in, but it's absolutely spectacular. On top of its natural beauty, the Chauvet Cave's most breathtaking feature is its art.
Hundreds of images adorn the walls, most of them.
I'm actually going to pause this right here because this is really important, and it's going to be important when we get to futurism, which is from the 1900s later on. So here you see one rhinoceros, but he has a ton of different horns. They did this in this manner to try and show movement. So instead of, because they couldn't figure out how to make it look like the rhinoceros was moving his head and make that look realistic, they would make repetitive patterns of that same image over and over to try and reference the motion that that animal had. The futurists are going to end up copying this idea. Of course, they won't realize that were doing the same thing because this wasn't found until 1994, and the futurists were working in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's just important to keep in mind that art repeats itself, just like history repeats itself.
Animals. They're surprisingly sophisticated, but these were painted 35,000 years ago by early humans. It's some of the oldest art ever found, but opening it up to the public could destroy it.
We risk contamination. The climate would be disturbed so much that we could have alteration of the paintings. We don't want to take this risk.
Now the French authorities have found a way to both preserve and promote the Chauvet cave. They've built another one. This stadium-sized replica cost 55 million euros. It reproduces some of the cave's most important features to scale.
It's hugely impressive, this collaboration between scientists, architects and engineers. But the walls here aren't made from rock, they're made from concrete and resin.
3D scans were used to create a digital map of the cave. Then sculptors and artists brought the natural features to life. Photos of the ancient art were projected onto canvases of fake rock. They took months to create.
It's important for the public to see the art in the environment. You have the darkness, you have also the fresh air and so on, the humidity. These elements are also an important part of the feeling of the emotion that you can have in front of the original.
Back in the original cave, and it's full of the echoes of history. But with so few privileged enough to experience this, the hope is that the replica will bring a glimpse of the past to the wider world.
So once again, I will just reiterate that you cannot see the original anymore. Any ideas as to why they won't let people into the original cave? Exactly. So that cave was closed off, like it said at the beginning, by a rock slide that perfectly preserved that climate for years and years in order to keep those art pieces intact and remain the way they were when they were first painted, which is why Chauvet caves are so impressive. A lot of cave paintings that were found have deteriorated over time due to climate change. Also, us interacting and breathing inside of the cave would lead to the destruction of those paintings over time. So what they've done instead is make an exact replica for people to visit, which is nice. Not the same, but nice. And here are those paintings in Utah. So like I said, in Utah, we're in North America, so they are okay with showing images of people. It's not really understood why in the European Paleolithic art they only portrayed animals, whereas in other areas they were fine with portraying people. No one really knows why. But in Utah we do have images of people. And here we have pictographs at Horseshoe Canyon. So pictographs are drawings on rock. And these particular drawings are 7 feet tall. So they're very large, abstract drawings of humans. They are outside, so they are exposed to the elements. Eventually, these drawings will no longer exist. but you can go visit them if you want to, if you're in Utah. Now you have two reasons to go to Utah. One for the spiral jetty and then one for pictographs. I don't know how close they are to each other, but hey. So next is rock art carvings or petroglyphs. Petroglyphs are sketches or carvings that have been made into art by scratching or pecking. And for our petroglyphs, we are going to go to Australia now. Australia has a wonderful petroglyph complex in the Dampier Archipelago. Those are outside once again and exposed to the elements, and once again, eventually they will no longer exist due to things like acid rain eroding those carvings and etchings into the rocks. It's also very difficult to determine the age of these petroglyphs because the Aboriginal people of Australia are still making them. So people have been making these petroglyphs in the only way, which is with carbon dating, and even then guess as to what's old and what's new. Because it's a little hard to carbon date a rock. And here's a little bit of an image of those petroglyphs. So once again, in the Australian complex of Paleolithic art, we see human figures. So who really knows why you wouldn't see people, but we only have one example. And also, like I said, they're still making these. And that takes us into Neolithic art. Neolithic art means new stone. So we're out of the old Stone Age and into the new Stone Age, and we are in the period of time in which civilizations are being born. Most people agree that the earliest civilization arises near modern-day Iraq, thanks to something called the Agricultural Revolution. The Agricultural Revolution takes place in several different spots around the world at approximately the same time period, but it is thought that the earliest people group to start off that revolution were in the Fertile Crescent, which is an area in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The agricultural revolution is marked when people decide to stop chasing their animals and start growing their own food and raising their own livestock instead. This is thought to have come about thanks to a period of a lot of rain in those areas, making the animals settle and stop moving for water sources, allowing people to domesticate them. And of course, with the change of lifestyle comes the change in tools needed to function. Prior, the main tools that a person would need to survive were a knife, a bow, an arrow, a spear, things like that. Now, thanks to the agricultural revolution, one of the main tools needed are pots to hold things. So now we're going to see a whole bunch of pottery examples. So like I said, there was a shift in living and lifestyles at this point, which also affected the things that were being produced by people. Instead of stone tools and stone weapons, we see a shift to clay pottery. And our clay pottery from early Neolithic era goes back to the geometric forms of early Paleolithic art. So early motif examples are plants, animals, such as the earthen beaker from Susa, but it's very abstract versions of those things. So here we have an earthenware pot made of terracotta clay. It would have been made using a coil method, so not a potter's wheel. The potter's wheel was not invented at this time period. And on it, we see decorative forms of animals, but very abstract versions of them. So here we see the ibex or the goat. Here you see dogs running around in the same pattern, and up here are cranes in a very repetitive pattern. You also see a repetitive pattern in the burial urn from Kansu province from China, which we can see here. So we see repetitive geometric abstract patterns in a lot of the old Neolithic pottery. And a lot of Neolithic structures, the oldest of them anyways, are very primitive, such as our dolmen from France that we looked at last Thursday, and Stonehenge, which is just a post-construction. Stonehenge for its time period, though, was very sophisticated. It showed a trend that switched from making things of wood that don't last and aren't sturdy to making houses and structures using stone, which is a lot more sturdy and durable. A lot of people debate the function of Stonehenge. Some people think that it is a burial site. Some people think that it was used for rituals for honoring the dead. Some people think it has to do with a calendar to help show harvest time and planting time. And some people think that it's a solar or lunar temple. There's a lot of theories on what its purpose was. There's also a lot of theories on how it was made exactly. And here is an aerial view. You'll notice there is an inner and an outer circle. The inner circle is made of blue stones and the outer circle uses a white limestone. The white limestone was from a few miles away. Each stone weighs several tons. The blue stones in the center, though, were from a few dozen miles away and once again weigh several tons. So there's a lot of questions as to why exactly they wanted those specific stones and how they managed to get them there, since they were from a faraway place. There's also a lot of remnants of like tents around this area and random objects and tools as well as graves. So that leads once again to them questioning what the actual purpose of Stonehenge was. So like I said, the Neolithic era marks the beginning of civilizations popping up. The word civilization is a term that distinguishes cultures that have complex social orders and high degrees of technical development, meaning they have a social hierarchy with someone at the top and people at the bottom, and they have rules. Other elements that make up a civilization are agriculture, animal husbandry, which I said is earlier is raising livestock and domesticating animals, occupation specialization, meaning people have special jobs, writing, and the production of bronze, which marks the beginning of something called the Bronze Age. Like I mentioned earlier, the earliest civilization known to man, although there are some debates about some earlier ones popping up nowadays, is Mesopotamia, located in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, also known as present-day Iraq, also known as the Fertile Crescent. The other major civilizations that popped up at relatively the same time period are Egypt, which is right next to the Nile River, the early native India people, which have a special name that we'll learn later on, which popped up near the Indus River Valley region, and then the ancient people of China that popped up near the Yellow River. So you'll notice that the one thing that all four of these early civilization people groups have in common is that they are located near freshwater sources, which is a common theme in most civilizations anyways. You want to be near fresh water so that you have fresh water, so that you have the water for your livestock and for your crops. So Mesopotamia is known as the land between the rivers being the Tigris and Euphrates. The oldest city of Mesopotamia is Sumer or Sumeria. Sumeria was made up of a bunch of different city-states. They didn't all work together. They kind of competed against each other like early Greek city-states did, which does not help when a conquering force is coming in if you don't really all agree or work together. Speaking of conquering forces, this land between the two rivers was conquered multiple times because it had no natural barrier to keep out invaders. So you might think, what? Egypt had a desert to protect one side of it. Greece had mountain ranges and an ocean to protect it. Most early civilizations had some sort of a natural barrier so that they only had to watch out for one portion of their land being invaded. But Mesopotamia had no such thing, leading to it being conquered multiple times. So as we go through this presentation, we're going to be talking about Mesopotamia for a while, but we're going to talk about different rulers for that region, just because it was conquered over and over and over again. But the first people to settle there were the Sumerians. The Sumerians had a hierarchy. In their hierarchy, the priests were at the top. So no kings, but priests. The priests were basically kings, but were the ones that could communicate with the gods, and they were also the ones that would make the rules. So no separation of church and state for the ancient Sumerians. It was literally the same thing. The priests, like I said, communed with the gods, and they did so in something called a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a temple which is very, well, it's supposed to be really tall, but in today's terms, probably not. In ancient terms, it was really, really tall, and at the top of that temple would be a stone or wooden structure where a statue would have been housed for that particular god it was worshiping. It was thought that the early Tower of Babel was a form of a ziggurat. The taller that your ziggurat was, the more likely your god was to come down and visit you, because in ancient Sumeria, it was thought that the gods would come down to talk to the priests. And the ziggurat was the location that the gods would come to. So they'd have like food up there all the time for them and everything. Ziggurats are made of sun-dried bricks. And once again, like I said, there was a shrine on top, and it was considered a link between heaven and earth. And here is a ziggurat. This is the ziggurat of Ur-Nammu. This is actually a reconstruction. Fun fact, you can see the actual old remnants of the ziggurat at the top, but Iraq went and refaced what they thought the ziggurat would have looked like. So that's why it looks so pristine here. Sun-dried bricks don't last too long because of rain and things like that. They erode very quickly. So this is all resurfaced and redone. But you can still see some of the remnants back there. So ziggurats are interesting in the fact that it looks like your main entrance to your temple would be right here. It's actually with no steel building to the entrance, which is weird. But yeah, that's how it was. So in Sumerian beliefs, just like in the Egyptians that we're about to talk about, you would bury your dead with objects that they could take with them into the afterlife. So we are going to be focusing the rest of this time on people groups that believed in the afterlife. So the idea that once you die, you go on into another world and you can take all your stuff with you and live your life out there, well, forever. So we are going to look at some artifacts from a king's tomb found in the city of Ur that he was supposed to take with him into the afterlife. One thing that he was going to take with him was a lyre. A lyre is a musical instrument, and on that lyre was a bearded bull's head. The bull is a signifying image for royalty, and the bull's head does have lapis lazuli on it. Of course, the wooden part was reconstructed because wood does not last forever. But here's your bull's head with lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is a semi-precious stone, so it would have also been a signifying factor for someone that was very wealthy. This is coated in gold. And then down below it is this panel that shows animals performing human tasks such as preparing dinner and making a textile. And it's thought that this actually illustrates the story of Gilgamesh, or some of the excerpts from the story of Gilgamesh, which is a famous story that popped out from the Sumerian region. After the Sumerians ruled for a period of time, they were conquered by the Akkadians. Like I said, these people conquer things over and over. The Akkadians ruled for a short period, and under them, they also were buried with objects and things. And here we have an example of a bronze statue of an Akkadian ruler. And of on throughout in the Mesopotamian region for quite a long time. And this is a wonderful example of someone making a bronze statue using the lost wax method. You'll notice he has no eyes or ears. Originally, he would have had eyes and ears, but when the Akkadians were conquered, their conquerors went around to these grave sites and defaced the statues because it was thought if you defaced the statues, then you also ruined the person in the afterlife, making their life very hard. The statue was supposed to signify this particular ruler and be like a surrogate body for him in the afterlife, because his actual body would deteriorate in his tomb. So the bronze statue was supposed to be his new body, and they went and took off its ears and eyes, so they ruined the surrogate body for this ruler in the afterlife. The Egyptians do a similar thing. Which takes us to the Egyptians. So in Mesopotamia, they're eventually conquered by the Babylonians, and then the Gadians, and then the New Babylonians, and then a whole bunch of other people. They just keep conquering things over and over. In Egypt, however, things don't really change forever. The styles remain pretty much the same for 2,500 years, which is a very, very long time of having things exactly the same. That's partially because people didn't really conquer Egypt. There is an example, there's two examples of Egypt being conquered. First off, Egypt used to be two Egypts. There used to be an Upper and a Lower Egypt. Each one had their own ruler. There was a ruler for Upper Egypt and a ruler for Lower Egypt, and eventually they ended up being united by the Upper Egypt ruler, making a new Egypt, a unified Egypt. And then there's also an example of Egypt being conquered by a, say, sub-Saharan African tribe. That's what I would call them. And they slightly changed the art styles for a brief period, slightly. But of course, what Egypt is most known for is their Great Pyramids. Egypt has produced pyramids as burial sites for a long period of time. Flat side pyramids that they're most known for were a newer version. The original version of the pyramid was a stepped pyramid, which was similar to the ziggurats that we just looked at. But pyramids functioned as burial sites for the pharaohs. That word pharaoh translates to God King. They were considered the God Kings of Egypt. They ruled for the gods. They're supposed to be representative of the gods or descended from the gods and chosen by them to rule. And the Great Pyramids themselves are made of huge stone blocks stacked together without any mortar holding them together in between. They also have a bunch of narrow passageways inside of them to try and confuse grave robbers. Because once again, we're talking about a people group that was buried with all of their possessions. So there would have been a great wealth available for grave robbers to take inside of these pyramids. And the Great Pyramids themselves are made for the pharaohs Khafre, Khufu, and Menkure. And these would have originally been coated with a flat surface of limestone on top. So they would have been very highly polished and white and flat. So it would have looked really fancy, but that limestone has worn away over the years. And of course, on Khafre's pyramid, he has the Great Sphinx outside, which leads to his pyramid, and it's considered like a temple area, temple complex for you to worship him. And that takes us to this map. So Great Pyramids of Giza. Later on, we're going to Amen, which was quite a ways away in Luxor. So tombs were a way for them to once again preserve the body and extend the life beyond death. That's one of the reasons why they were so interested in mummification as well. They put a lot of effort into studying how to properly embalm their bodies and display the artifacts in those tombs. And it's thanks to those bodies and artifacts that we have such a vast amount of knowledge of ancient Egypt today. Oftentimes, just like with the Akkadian ruler, they would bury these people with statues of themselves when the off chance, because that body's probably going to end up deteriorating over time. That way they would have that statue as a surrogate body for them to enter. Something that happened, though, was a trend of pharaohs not wanting to make pyramids. That starts around the time when Queen Hatshepsut, why can't I talk today? I really can't talk today. I've never had a problem saying this word before. Hatshepsut. I really can't say it. Oh well, whatever. Hatshepsut. There we go. I don't know why I can't talk today. So instead of a pyramid, she decided to create basically an entire palace complex for her tomb to exist in. It's a very grand structure, and it was built into the cliffs. And it is right here. So it literally looks like it has become a part of the cliff area behind it. There would have originally been gardens all the way throughout leading up to the back. The back area is where her actual tomb was. The front complex areas honored different gods and goddesses, so you'd walk through their temples to get to her tomb. And of course, adorning all of these temples would have been different statues and hieroglyphs and stories illustrating important moments in Hatshepsut's life and things that she accomplished. She basically wanted to show off the amount that she was able to get done despite the fact that she was a woman. But funny enough, Hatshepsut, a lot of her statues, she portrays herself as a man. She doesn't often portray herself as a woman. So speaking of sculptures, most Egyptian sculptures are very heavy, stocky, sturdy figures. They wanted to portray their pharaohs and their gods and goddesses as strong, young, muscular people. So even if your pharaoh was an old man, he would be portrayed in his prime. Something else that was always common with Egyptian sculptures is the frontal pose with the left foot forward, and usually clenched fists, such as King Menkaure and his queen. These statues were made in multiple copies of Menkaure and his queen. So here you see the king. The queen is slightly behind him. You can see because his shoulder is on top of hers. Both of them have a left foot forward. However, his is further in front than hers, once again to signify that he is more important than her. And very rigid pose. Normally, whenever a person takes a step forward, their posture will change. So right now they're being portrayed like this, but normally when you take a step forward, your shoulders will slightly dip to one side and your hips will move as well. However, they have not chosen to do that in Egyptian art. That's important to keep in mind for tomorrow when we get to the Greeks, because they're going to do something different. Continuation of the idea of sculpture. So briefly, before the boy king pharaoh of Tutankhamun, his father was Akhenaten, that guy that did things that looked like aliens that we talked about last week. He portrayed people in an interesting way because he didn't want to show genders of anyone or differentiate between male and female. He also changed up the system of the gods as well as other things. Because he decided to change up all of the art styles and the religions and a lot of other stuff, that ended up affecting art after him. a little bit. Tutankhamun, like I said, was his son. Tutankhamun changed back to the style of having multiple gods. He also changed the art style. However, something that continued on from his father Akhenaten was showing a more feminine side to the sculptures. Instead of having them look stiff and rigid, such as Menkura here, they will have a softer tone to them. Tutankhamun is, of course, very, very famous because his tomb was intact until it was found in modern times by archaeologists. That's because Tutankhamun died before his pyramid was completed. So he was buried in someone else's tomb, a lesser tomb. Because he was buried in a tomb, grave robbers didn't know that it was there. In fact, the name on the tomb wasn't his, it was someone else's name. So people didn't realize that all of that was there, so it didn't get stolen. That being said, thanks to none of his stuff being stolen, we have the greatest record of objects from his tomb out of all of the other tombs that we found, including his sarcophagus, which is entirely inlaid with gold. So this is the mask. With the sarcophagus, there's an inner and an outer sarcophagus and a mask that would have adorned these mummies. Of course, the closer you get to the actual mummy, the more intricate and detailed the displays of sculptural talent are. So here we see his funerary mask. This would have been placed over his head. And this is all gold inlaid with semi-precious stones. Let's see if I don't. Let me pull it up. We got a little bit of time. Let me see if I can even spell his name today. Oops, wrong. And here you can see the inner sarcophagus image. Once again, gold, not as detailed as the mask. And of course, the outer is a wood inlaid with stones and covered in gold leaf. But wait, there's one more thing we have to talk about, and I got 5 minutes. So we're going to talk about it. And that takes us to the last thing, which is hierarchic scale. In Egyptian art, as well as Mesopotamian art, even though we didn't cover it, they used something called hierarchic scale. Hierarchic scale is the idea that the more important you are in your image, you're going to be bigger. This is going to be happening in the tomb of Nebamun, as well as many, many other examples that we didn't have time to cover today, in which Nebamun is the biggest person. Nebamun was an important official in Egyptian period, well, a brief period of Egyptian history. And behind him in a smaller figure, you see his wife, and then the smallest person in the image is his daughter, because she is the least important. He's the most important. So hierarchic scale shows the most important person, biggest and least important as the smallest. That's going to pop up quite a bit as we continue on throughout art history. Also, this is a great example of the fact that they're really good at showcasing animals, but not so much at people. So tomorrow we are going to continue with the ancient Greeks, and we're going to answer our discussion post question tomorrow as well. Keep in mind that you're going to want to go ahead and start on that gallery review and figure out which gallery you want to go to, if you want to go in person or virtual. So look at that list and figure that out. That'd be a good thing to do today. It shouldn't take you too long to go through those and figure out which one you want. And of course, if you have any questions about your discussion post or your gallery review, feel free to reach out to me.